Hello, 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 everyone. How is everybody doing today? Welcome to the Flipside Leadership Live. And today's the rant. I get my first Thursday of the month, and that means I get my co-host back. Here she is, off of a fresh vacation in Scotland. It looks like she got a ton of sun while she was there. It's Laura. How you doing, kid?
Great. How are you?
Good.
Happy
See you
September.
back. Happy September. It's my birthday month. So I think I don't know. Wait, I have kids. So I get literally half a day, I think. So it'll be at the end of the month. I get my half a day. It's 26th. I got a long time.
We're a month apart. Exactly.
Because you had yours, right?
In August.
Yeah, that's right. So happy belated to you last week.
Yeah.
That's right. I did send you a text. I forgot.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff going on. I am not in my office today, so that is not a background. That is real for everybody who knows. And I'm doing that because we are coming in 2 weeks. We get to debut the Everyday Leadership course on Lions Guide. So for everybody that's going to watch this later, look for that in the next couple of weeks. We're going to start to do that. And you'll see me talking here, vice inside of my office, because I think it's just a little bit more, gives you a different perspective, and it gives you a real thing. So today, we are going to talk about accountability. That is it's a big one, right? I mean, it's one of the, you would say, foundational things about leadership in some way, somehow, some fashion. But I think, and what it's come from me is that Dale and I and Laura, I'm probably sure you get this as well, not only in your job right now, but what you've gone is people always ask, how do I hold someone accountable? Because it's easy to talk about the concept, but really then how as a leader do you hold someone accountable? And we're going to get into that in the very end. So let's hold off on that one. We'll wait till the end of this, or towards the at least the middle half to start to talk about that. But what's your take on accountability? When you think about it, what do you think about when you do?
Well, I think an initial perception of the word accountability probably makes people feel uneasy, right? It's all about those crucial conversations. It kind of fills people with dread. It's about the feedback or whatever. But really, accountability doesn't have to be seen that way. Accountability can be, if you bring this stuff forward right away and you have clear expectations, you use clear language, you check in often, accountability doesn't have to be a scary thing. So that's my perception with accountability. And really, Flip, you know this, I'm all about being empathetic and compassionate as a leader.
Absolutely.
And knowing my perception might not be the reality, and asking a lot of questions when it comes to accountability so that I get their side of the story before I jump to conclusions and want to just reprimand somebody. Right?
Yeah. And I think and I'm with you. I think that's vitally important. We do that too much, right? The art of underreacting. And I think there's people, my current boss is really good at really soaking every single part of it in. It's one of the things I commend him on all the time, about that he's good at leadership with. And I've seen a lot of leaders be the opposite, where they just jump to conclusions, right? And I think you have to have, to your point, I think you have to have an avenue to be able to do that, right? Whether that's a friend, a mentor, and like we used to have enlisted advisors, a senior enlisted advisor that you could ping someone, a commanding officers could ping somebody off of, a CEO that has somebody that goes, let me run this by you and see how it sounds before I just, before I blast it out there or whatever and go scorched earth on people. So yeah, so to your point, I would agree with you. I love that you said clear, concise, really, and already started up about communication. You could take communication, this is so does I, and add it to any single piece of leadership that you get from the hands down, right? We had my friend Jason on. Go ahead. Yeah. Say it again.
I said it's the golden thread through leadership.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
You're a great way to put that. I love that. And I think it's the one that breaks down the most, right? I just had my buddy Jason on last month and in August as a guest. And that was one of his top leadership things. Is you have to be able to have being a good communicator. And it's a perishable skill, right? So when you're talking about accountability, it doesn't I don't think that takes away from the fact that you have to, these are actively, you have to continue to work on skill sets when you move. And I agree with you that clear, concise communications. I also love that you said check-ins, right? Because you're starting to dabble in what I think we're going to get into, and that's foundational things almost before pre-accountability, right? Like, so we're getting into how do you hold someone accountable, but the fact of the matter is that there has to be things in place before. You just can't magically make a target and go, okay, now why didn't you do this? And you're like, well, that's, wait a minute, right? So I think leadership, when we talk about accountability, unlike other things, right? So when I looked it up, I always do the definition thing because I think it's, these are one of these words, you know how when you were in grade school, yes, you do know because you used to teach it. When they said you can't use the word in the definition, right? You're not allowed to use that. The thing was I couldn't find anything that didn't have the act of holding someone accountable, right? Is accountability or the whatever it is, right? And responsibility was also in that, right? Of being able to do. And what it led me to believe, and tell me if you agree, I think when we talk about accountability, I think there's two levels, right? At least two levels, right? So there's personal accountability, and then there's let's say it's company or business or entity, team, whatever it is, accountability, right? For whatever. So what we usually like to think is, well, how do I hold someone accountable as a leader? Well, first, I guess you would have to hold yourself accountable for the standards and practices that you're doing, right? I mean, would you agree with that?
Lead by example.
Lead by example, exactly, right? Which isn't always, I mean, I guess in today's day and age, there's some fundamental differences out there about what it means to lead by example of what we've seen. Everybody doesn't always agree, because I think there's a lot of people, let's just take the political scene. And you know us, we don't care which side of the fence anybody stands on. But if we talk about accountability, we're talking about a section that when they say, when they tweet, when they do whatever it is, there's consequences to those actions. We could take sports stars the same way. You could take leadership like you have as civic leadership in a government. Consequences, there's consequences to those actions that they have, right?
And what you do as a leader, even outside the organization, matters. You've reached that next level. And
yeah, I can remember when we used to make chief petty officers, we always go back to it. But look, I can't tell you what music to listen to. I can't tell you whatever. But I always use the example. I said, if you come driving up, and no matter what music you love, but you're blaring it, is that like people are going to see you? Like we were in Pensacola at the time, and you knew all around you were students. There was 10,000 aviation students from the Navy and Marine Corps that all started their careers in Pensacola, as well as young officers starting their careers there. And if you got seen out in town, you were being judged, right? And so I had a great story, which I got to give, and I love Josh to death, and he'll tell you this was hilarious. But he came up to me one day, and I knew Josh from a previous job that we worked at. He was younger than me at the time. And he goes, hey man, I want to buy a moped. I want to drive it to work. This is in like 2000 this is 2011. Gas was skyrocketing, right? Everything was like high up there. Yeah. And we worked at the Rescue Summer School. And I said, Josh, just remember this. I said, you're going to pull up in your little Vespa scooter to like the second, third most challenging physical, mental school in the Navy, right? SEALs, EOD, right? SWIC, those ones are all there. And then there was Rescue Summer School was right up there. And I said, so just remember, when you're yelling and knife handing someone in the face, all they're going to think about is they're going to think about you're riding in a Vespa. He's like, but it's really economical. I said, I bet it is. I said, but I just want you to know you're going to have to overcome that little glitch. Funny part of that story is later on, he bought a full-size, like, military grade Hummer, not the H2 and stuff, which is hilarious. And then he had that he was driving in on, which I thought was hilarious. He went from one extreme to the other. But it was about, right, like what's holding a standard right to there, whatever that's going to be. Just know you need to, I think the point I like to try to make in that story is that just know you have to overcome those obstacles if you're ever going to just to reset where your baseline wants to be. Does that make sense? Like right?
Yeah, you lose a level of trust or respect based on something you did. You're going to have to find a way to gain it.
Yeah, whatever that is. And that's erosion, right? And the worst case is it happens over time and it erodes and you don't see it. And then all of a sudden it rears its ugly head at a weird time. And so you're accountable. Yeah. And I think that's why we talk about staying, and you and I have talked about this before, you want to stay active in your leadership skill sets, whatever those are going to be. You can't rest on those laurels, whether that's through leadership reading and learning or whether it's just daily use. Those are tough to do, but you want to be able to keep those things, in my opinion, anyways, to where that is. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad I'm on this podcast with you because this is like a really great reboot for me every month as a leader too, to like not only get further insight, but just to like, just clarify who I want to be as a leader and make sure that I'm doing what I'm saying I'm doing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, whether it's me reading something or whether it's me talking on here, when I talk to Dale, I get to talk to Dale, whether I work my own job.
Right.
I told when I was coming on to do this and I was kind of, if you were selling it to my boss, I said, hey, listen, I said, at some point in time, we're going to have leadership development within our company. We're not at that size yet. I said, but whatever that is, I said, all I'm doing is learning from this and keeping my skill sets up so that when it comes down, either I translate that to you when I'm there to help you, right? Because you can do the same thing. You can go back to your leaders where you are and say, hey, I'm going to use these skill sets and make sure. And you're right. It's a great monthly check for whatever. So good plug for everybody to watch us, because that way, then now you get your monthly fill for your leadership stuff, which is
and Vespa will probably never be a sponsor.
That's right. Exactly. So I guess then we'll start to touch on how does Laura, and I think we're both going to start with the word foundation because I think we believe that, but when people want to ask us, look, okay, the definition can mean with anything. Everybody has their little bit of, it surrounds this like really good, be a good person type of right definition, whatever, if you put the word responsible in, if you use the word accountable within it, honestly, it doesn't matter. Like it all sits around that whole, like, look, I'm going to just do the right thing with it around and make sure that, you're making sure that everybody else does the same thing if you're holding someone else. So, but let's talk about then, how do we get to the question of how do you hold someone accountable? I'll let you kind of start with that, because I think we're going to start both with foundations, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So when I think of my own foundations,
we'll start personal. Let's start personal first. Yep. Okay.
Build high trust. Relationships matter. Okay. You need to be purpose focused, or at least know like why are we all here, so that when it comes back to it, remember, we're a service oriented industry, or we need to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our stakeholders, or our board is happy with what we're doing. So whatever other entity you can bring is helpful, and then it gives everybody that central vision to lead towards.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
I think I have a when you guys, so we won't say where, but Laura works as a Parks and Rec director in a state up north. Let's just put it that way for now. I don't know if you want me to put it all out there, but you are responsible and accountable to higher ups, right? When you looked at taking over that job, did you look at what their vision and what the town's vision was and say, okay, if I'm going to make my own vision for this seat and position that I'm in, were you basing that off of your kind of, because you're going to have your own, I want to be able to do this, right? And your things, but did you go back and go and look at what those people who you report to and say, hey, I want to marry that? Because you talked about purpose orientated. Did you marry that to what theirs were?
Yeah. And I never explicitly asked what their vision is, but our city is, first of all, the city administrator is somebody that I've worked with in the past and I know very well. And I know that our leadership and our vision for the city is very similar, right? Even if we didn't explicitly talk about it, there are wonderful, proactive, progressive changes happening within our city right now. and it's wonderful. And I don't mean progressive in the term of politics. I just mean
Yep.
very forward thinking. I know that there would be some autonomy with this job, but I'd still have to report to a board. But the boards that I report to are very understanding, and they also want the city to move in this direction.
Yeah.
And so there's really wonderful things happening. If this job was open and the board was controversial, or the city administrator and mayor just, this is how it's always been done, we're going to stay here, I would never have even attempted to apply or even look at the job.
Got it.
So I feel like Laura Colbert, who loves to make positive change, can actually do that, and that's a driving force for me.
That's good.
I'm a collaborator, and I know that all these other city entities like the library and the school district, they're all open to have conversations about how can we work together. And so that in and of itself is a huge draw for me too.
Good. And that you're kind of blending the two together, I think, from personal to business, right? It was your personal things that looked at that. I had for personal, I looked at standards, right? So I looked at what standards are for what your ethics, what your morals are that you keep for yourself of going to be, of where you are. And then I put in also societal standards, because I think we're going to get into this. And I always get into this with accountability, and everybody asks me, they're like, because you always get into the thing, well, if just because you do that doesn't mean that I do that, right? And I think it can be, there is definitely gray areas where you can get into those things. I define it more, I think, in business, and I guess we'll just blend this all together. But when I think of foundationals for business, it sounds like what you were, and I guess I led you on that question. But it was like, look, when you get into business, you have very black and white things when you check on board, right? You've got HR rules that say, do this, don't do this, get your check in on time, send your whatever receipts. So those are your to me, that's HR. Those are kind of businessy, how you work. You also have your job description saying, hey, I'm hiring you to do this. I want you to know to do this. But here's where I like, this is the part that gets, I think, a lot of people. A lot of people can easily, or should be able to easily, a lot of time they forget it, go back to those things and go, this is how we operate. Here, read the manual. It's right here, right? But then you have company norms, right? So I'll use the example of saying, like, hey, we work 9 to 5. But everybody's okay if they roll in at 9:10. But even though the manual says 9 o'clock, right? Everybody just knows, oh yeah, we just get here right around 9. Well, okay, that's a company norm, and as long as that's good and everybody's okay with it, that's fine. But if it's written at 9 and now your company norm is widely accepted, you can't go back and go, dude, you weren't here at 9. Yeah. Like it says on your paper, this is what, and I think that's where, when I think about accountability, right? It's the gray, right? It's the, what have we allowed to happen and what are we okay with, that really drives accountability. Because it's the part of, like, they talk about KPIs and you talk about lead and lag indicators. That's great. Like, but you're either doing your job or you're not. And the accepted parts of that surround it, that are people are like, well, that goes outside of it, but we'll accept it. That's when you start to get into really gray areas, in my opinion, about accountability. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think that if whatever you as an organization, or you as a person that's a leader, whatever you deem is important, that needs to be something that you're very clear on from the get-go. So, for example, like we are a customer-oriented business, because we want people to join Parks and Rec. We want people to donate money to parks. We want people to join our rec programs to bring in the profit. And so if we treat somebody poorly, that doesn't bode well. So that needs to be clear up front. Good customer service, not like, oh, it's okay to treat that person that way or that person that way. It has to be very clear and concise. So, like, if going back to your point of 9 versus 9:10, if opening up at 9 is so important because that person needs to get their morning coffee, because we're a coffee shop, you better be there at 9, and I'm going to make that super clear to you from the get-go. But if it's just like, oh, everybody comes in, checks their email, and it's not that big of a deal, and it isn't that big of a deal for your business profit, your business mentality, something else will probably be a big deal.
Yeah, because you and I are used to getting there 15 minutes early to be able to do whatever. And that's not normally here. That's the funny part, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll use my wife as an example. Like, she knows her first patient is at X time, but she knows she needs to get there early to be able to do that. Well, as long as you check in early and it's clocked in and they're paying you, cool. It falls into where the customer or the where the employee sort of goes, hold on a second. I'm not getting paid to come in 15 minutes earlier to set up, but my first patient is at 9. So then you as a leader, I think, in order to hold them accountable and not ask them and pay them accordingly, this is where everybody skimps, right? These are where all these little gray cracks come in, where you're like, this can cause things down the road. Like, you may have to say, cool, why don't check in at 8:45? You'll get an extra 15 minutes, right? Every 4 days, you're going to get an extra hour of paychecks because I'm allowing you to check in at 8:45 because I need you ready by 9, right?
Yeah.
Like, simple example, great example of accountability, and saying, how does a leader then say, right? Because, but who's right? Nobody's right there. Like, if you're not going to pay me to be there and start at 9, right? Or that's the time my clock starts, then I can remember checking in. They were like, you better check in only 2 minutes beforehand because that's what you had to do, right? So, but then military wise, we're like, dude, I'm here 15 minutes or I'm here 30 minutes early because I need to. Right?
Early, you're late.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I guess getting paid 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 was very different than what it is. But it is, I think, when we're talking about accountability, those are the small cracks between leaders and team members that's to go, well, wait a minute. And I think as a leader, you can address them to say either, hey, we're good. Like, I don't maybe expect people and flex time and telework has been, I mean, that's kind of changed the game as well, to say, what it is. And, we try to have hours, but I mean, look, it's meeting mission, right? Like, meet the mission. I'll pay you for meeting the mission for this much.
That was good. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's probably super important about accountability too, of saying, what are you going to base your performance review or thing? Is it to meet the mission, or is it counting hours, right? What is it really going to be? And I get it.
Right. I think to that point, being fair and being consistent, right? So if I were to just say to you, you need to be here at 9, I don't really trust you. And then I say to somebody else, you can roll in at 9:10, it's fine. I know you're going to be here. That's not consistent, right? So, like, build that trust with the first you, and just be as fair as possible and mission driven.
So hold on. Let's start the rant. So what happens then when your norms are, hey, we can roll in we're good rolling in at whatever, right? Like, let's say we're okay. Let's say the company norm is you can roll in at 9:10, right? Okay. What happens when someone then you go back and you say, hey, it's 9 o'clock, and someone goes, well, that's not for everybody. Do you then just roll it back for everybody? So is it egalitarian, where you're like, well, one person screws up, you all pay the price? Because I know your answer for the Army would have been, one person screws up, we all pay the price, right? But that's right, exactly. But that's not necessarily, I mean, that's tough, because when it becomes norms and it becomes acceptable, and then someone ruins that kind of good deal, if you will, then what's the right? Because someone can say, well, I didn't screw up. Why would I screw up?
I would talk to the individual. I would,
right,
before I punish everybody, it's about the individual.
Yeah.
Have I said these adages to you? Like, what you accept, you promote.
You are now. Go ahead.
And whoa. Let me think on it for a second. What you permit, you promote.
Okay.
What you accept, you teach. So going back to that accountability factor, if there's something that is a miss, the faster you deal with it, the better it's going to be. Because if John starts showing up at 9:20 and you don't address it with John, and everybody's like, oh, well, he can get here at 9:20, I'm going to get here at 9:20. Essentially, the boss is telling everybody that that's okay, right? The sticky wicket here, though, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. Let's say I approached John and I said, John, you need to be here at 9:10, not 9:20.
Can we use Mark?
Yeah, let's use Mark.
I have 3 Johns in my company. I don't want to think that this has anything to do if they listen one day. So let's use Mark. I have nothing, just so we know. I have a lot of Johns in my company.
Okay, so anyway, so Mark, yeah, you talk to Mark. Mark doesn't change, but people think because so me as a leader, I don't like to just divulge to everybody, oh, I talked to Mark about coming in later. I want that to be a private conversation with Mark.
Sure.
Because I still respect him. I don't want him to feel like I'm talking behind his back. It's not who I am as a leader. So anyways, what do? Like, Mark is still showing up late. Everybody thinks you didn't approach Mark because you're not verbalizing this conversation you already had. I want to hear what you're going to do.
Honesty, consistency, transparency from the top down builds trust, loyalty, and respect from the bottom up, right? I'm going to go with that because it's my mantra. Listen, they all know Mark's late.
Yeah.
If you've built the foundations beforehand to say, hey, look, I'm not there to put everybody's business on Front Street. That's not necessarily what I'm here to do. I want to say that I used to do this in soccer, and I would do something similarly when I used to coach youth soccer, and I had all these 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, right? So that is a fun age to coach them because it's challenging it's way beyond soccer of why that's challenging. But what I would do is I would have a parent approach me and say, hey, this is what's happening. I mostly saw stuff, but there's a lot of things I didn't see if I'm trying to run a drill and I don't see the little antics that are happening necessarily, right? So I had a mom call me and say, hey, my daughter is getting picked on by this player. And I said, okay. I said, how do you want to handle it? I said, because here's my suggestion to you. I said, I think the parent would be very receptive if you went parent to parent. You could call them and say, hey, this is what's happening. Can you please talk to your daughter? I said, I, though, will also have the conversation with the entire group. So what I ended up doing was, and I don't know how this would play out as well with adults, but I would say, hey, listen, we all don't act that way with each other, period. You're a team. This is how we act. This is what we do. We don't. So I didn't call out that person in front of the group. I had the back scenes things working. And I think that's what you're talking about, of saying, how do you address the people that go, well, John didn't get talked to about, or excuse me, Mark didn't get talked to about his lateness, where you can right. So if the culture is that if we hear something at an end of week meeting that's talking about lateness, you can assume that somebody just got right. You can make the assumption that happened. Now that's not, that's and still have your back room or your office closed door conversation and say, hey man, we have a team here, right? You're part of this team. You're an important part of this team. Like, other people are going to see that this is happening. Right. And this is, and I actually always, so one thing I really did that was important, I think, about how to handle that is I talk about those other implications. So not just you're late. It's also everybody, like, Mark, I just want you to understand, this is how this breaks down the rest of the team. They're going to think, well, Mark got to and I didn't. So listen, I'm going to address it overall in a meeting. Right? I'm not going to call you out on it, but I'm going to address it as a team overall. And that way people understand, almost off the cuff subliminal, like saying, oh, we're getting talked about this because Mark. Then there doesn't need to be anything said between Mark and the rest of the team, but they know, hey, I'm bringing this up and it's important. And then it reinforces the other stuff too, right? In my opinion anyways, it reinforces the notion to the team to say, oh, maybe Mark did get talked to. And oh, by the way, if somebody didn't even see that situation and was thinking, well, maybe I could do it. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, this is a hot button issue again. We need to I need to check myself if that's the case. I think, look, is there a right way to do it? Is that head on? Sure, it's head on some, but it's doing what you talked about too, which is saying, look, I'm not trying to put Mark on Front Street where he feels like, a D-bag. Like that's not the point. Nobody needs to know why those are happening. Maybe it's because his daughter's, what's it called, changed, or maybe whatever it is. But I am full agreement of saying, if it's something like, hey, my daughter's, let's say my daughter's daycare changed, their time changed, I would wholeheartedly accept and allow like things like that. Like if it's like, I'm going to get cancer treatment every morning, like, okay, I'm not going to put that on, right? Like that's very different. But like something that's common to everybody, I think then it is important to put it out and saying, if somebody asked me and said, oh yeah, his daughter's things changed and we worked around that. And if something comes up with you that you need something like this, like this is why we're here. This is why we're a team. We'll be happy to take that on and see what we can work around it. Right. If that's, because I think that's what you have to do. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, exactly. And that goes back to the whole point of don't make assumptions, ask questions first.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
Don't jump in there with an angry principal voice.
Yeah, and I think your conversation with Mark in our scenario that we've played out for everybody to hold him accountable, the conversation that we have with Mark, some way, somehow, is going to affect the rest of the team. Because if you don't do anything, Mark's going to come in late and people are going to go, Mark's getting special treatment, right?
Yes.
And then if you erode that, you're going to take a good employee and they're just going to be like, I'm done. Like, this is obviously getting special favors for something. So right. I think once it's been put in that position, good, bad, or other, just announce it and say, hey guys, listen, we work this time, in this case, 100% being able to work with people about issues that they have, because that's how we are. I value you all as people and as workers on this team. And we could make things up the other way. Nobody's, to the naysayers or to the cynics that are going to be like, hey, he's working less. I promise you, I may be tasking him with other things, or I'll always do that to make sure that everybody's being held accountable to their responsibilities as to what we're supposed to be doing. I think that's a great conversation to have. It's a great foundation, right? If you think about it.
Right. And you are being open and transparent, but not divulging too much information.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think something is silly. To me, it's silly, and it may not be for everybody. But if Laura Colbert said, I got my because it's very common, my daycare time changed 30 minutes. I need this on the back end. I think you telling, like if I said to you, can I, I'm not going to use your name, but I'm going to, and maybe not to that effect, but I might say something like, hey guys, I understand that daycares change all the time. I understand I get that part. Our team is here to work with everybody else on those types of things. Still going to hold everybody accountable to their hours and their responsibilities that they need to do for the company. But I just want you all to know, if we need to work around that, we can. Whether that's some people stay later because they're coming in later, we can do this as a team and we can work through it as a team. Tell me what you would think about if you heard that at a meeting. And you weren't the one that started the problem, if that's it, right? So if you weren't the one that had the problem, but all of a sudden you heard that, what would you think?
I would think, like, I want to work here. This person understands me, understands that their life has hiccups.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
I'm badass, I know. But what I'm saying really, no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding to everybody. But yeah, like that would be someone I would want to work with too, of saying, listen, you're working around the problem. You're being able to be flexible to what's happening. You're holding me accountable to still say, hey, and not to say you're going to make up those hours, but meet the mission. And if there's not to, because I understand from a data and analytics and a CFO type side that goes, what are we paying for? And every single time I send someone out, it's this much money and it costs this much to, I get that side too. I 100% do. And I get like how you can say, well, if they're not working, you and I used to do this all the time, right? You're like, well, if you're not working in the military, you're like, why are they here? Like, if you're, what are we? We're just sitting around. Why are we sitting around? Like, send me home. I'm on 365 anyways. What am I doing? Like I could be called away in a minute's notice, like blah, 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 blah. Like whatever you want to put it as. I get that that's not how it works. And I get some places go, hey, man, we got nothing for you today. Why don't you go ahead and check out because we're not going to pay you anymore. I understand that side of it, which you could totally do. But we're talking kind of salary people here that you're like, you know, like if we're talking by hour people, sure. If we don't need it, we don't have any work to do, whatever, cool. Clock in, clock out. I understand that, right? And I think that type of mentality for accountability is when it filters up is easily accountable. Well, I'm just not going to pay you because you didn't start until 30 minutes later versus someone on salary that you say, hey, we'll work around that, meet the mission, we're good to go. I mean, right? I mean, that's, yeah.
And I'm thinking my kids just started school today. There's teachers that have to be there at a certain time, no matter what. But even, you know, because the kids are going to be there and somebody's got to be in the room. But even as a principal, I was able to say, you know what, we'll get you a sub. You got to take care of yourself. Family comes first. So like those things, it seemed like there's no wiggle room. There's always exceptions.
Right. I think that's when you're talking about accountability, I think about flexibility coming directly into the play of saying, how do I make sure that I'm flexible enough to work around, right? How do I adapt? Adaptability comes to mind too, of saying, how do I use these abilities, if you will, and go around and work around what we need to work around while still maintaining the level playing field and the team culture that I want to have. It's not going to, again, chip a road, right? I think about an iceberg, right? And I think about sometimes how there's so much more of an iceberg below the surface than there is above the surface usually, right? And I think about it in the sense of saying those little things it may seem it's the little things under the water and it just chips away and chips away and chips away and chips away until you're like, until it's like, well, wait a minute, you did all these extra kind of things and it was never addressed to anybody, right? If you're an accountable leader and you're holding people accountable, you need to have the difficult conversations with people immediately, right?
Yes.
You cannot let them, I think that's a huge deal where when you don't have little things addressed right away, what you end up with big things down the road. And I think that's you're setting yourself up for failure, something that you could have taken on a lot. I mean, a lot at minimum, you've made a more awkward conversation for yourself later, right?
And if you're perseverating it overnight or for weeks or whatever, that's just undue stress on yourself. Just have the conversation again.
Yeah. I'm all about, like you said in the beginning, right? Get your facts straight before you go in. Calm down, right? I had an issue where I got very heated recently and I got to take myself away. I got to stop this and I need to be able to do that. I did my vent, what I needed to do, and then came back to the thing and said, okay, now we can re-engage about what we need to do. I'm all for that in a sense. And I'm all for saying, I can't handle this right now because I need to get all my information before. You've done that before, right? Where you were like, I can't accuse a kid of doing something unless I have the proper information about it. I'm not saying it's an immediate, neither one of us are saying that.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying is right. I think in an accountability sense, we're saying, hey, get your facts straight, get how you want to do it, understand what the optics of what you're going to do, and then attack the accountability piece of saying, I'm still going to hold that person accountable, right? With all those extra things that come onto it.
Yeah. I have 2 points I want to make. One is, you know, as a leader, we have to make sure that when we hold somebody accountable, that we are as clear as possible. So I'm just going to tell you a short story that I heard. So this isn't my own story, but a brand new leader had somebody coming to work in like a cocktail dress, and it was pretty revealing and a little bit inappropriate for the workplace. And this leader went up to this person and said, "Nice cocktail dress." That leader's perception was, I just told that person I know it's a cocktail dress and they shouldn't be wearing it. What the person in the cocktail dress read was, "Oh, my boss likes this dress, I'm going to wear it more often." Right? So you have to make sure that you are actually having those those explicit conversations and using the words that you need to be using instead of just offhanded comments that you think are going to drive the point home.
I have fallen into that trap.
Yeah.
A very similar situation with a student, and it did not go the way I thought it was going to go. And I had to explain myself for it, and no ill intentions whatsoever. But I was probably trying to be. So one of the things I think we try to be, and we have never talked about this, and I think at some point we should, but leadership versus likership, right?
Oh.
So yeah, and it's a great thing. I actually saw your Army. For those of you that don't know, the Army loves to put signs all over their bases of like these inspirational things. So when we were in Kuwait, I saw a sign that said, well, "We need leadership, not likership." And I took a picture of it. I used it on things. I love the sign. I was trying, and I've fallen into the trap where you're trying to be liked more than you are trying to lead.
Absolutely.
And to your point of what you just said about the dress, I had a very similar thing happen to me where I said something that was very mistaken the wrong way. It was not intended that way. And I was trying to lead and saying, this is inappropriate. I didn't say it the correct way. And I apologize for the way it came out. And again, not intended, but yeah, you got to kind of be a very even keeled so that way you're not getting interpreted the wrong way. Because you're right. Yours was interpreted as, oh, he likes it or she likes it. Mine was interpreted very much differently in the wrong way of saying, whoa, that's not what I was intended to do. So
right.
Yeah, you can. And again, there's two examples of almost probably the same thing of saying like, whoa, hold on a second, so
yeah. So be direct, right? And just say what you need to say. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, and we did this a lot as a principal. So we're working with youth. I did it at all the schools I was at. It's this idea of restoration. So like, let's say that that you are trying to hold somebody accountable, an employee accountable, and there needs to be trust rebuilt, or that trust could be between you and that person, or the trust could be between that person and other employees, or that trust could be the person and clients. So making sure that whatever this accountability issue is, that there's this restoration of communication or trust so that they can rebuild and come back just as strong. And so having that conversation, like, how are we going to fix this, is really helpful too.
Yeah, I love that you call it a restoration of trust, because obviously on both sides there's a letdown in expectation potentially, right? And that could be from so if you and I were, if I was, or better yet, if you were my boss, more importantly, which would probably happen anyway, I could totally, like, I've never heard that before, by the way. I understand the concept of rebuilding it, but calling it a restoration, that's awesome. Like I've never heard that before. And I love the 2 points that you brought out. It's like, okay, now we're in this next phase of the incident has happened. I've held you accountable. Because here's the thing. I'm gonna listen, I believe that, especially if I got taught a skill, like if I went and I've done something my whole entire life, or I've done a technical skill my whole life and I'm an expert in it, and just things got into the way or I made a bad decision, and now because when you may be putting out a good product, but maybe the expectations of the HR part isn't there. Your PD's good, but your HR is not there. Or maybe you're taking advantage of the company norms, right? That's normally accepted. It's not. So whatever it is, it doesn't matter. At some point, I feel also that maybe I'm not holding myself accountable to the standard that I know I need to do. And now all of a sudden you, being my superior, is saying, hey, listen, I'm holding you accountable for it. I love the fact that there's what we're calling, or what you call anyways, and I'm now going to start to call a restoration period of saying, hey, listen, we got to build this back up. Let's make sure we put things in place to build back up now that I've held you accountable. Because it could be, because you know what I think? I love this. I actually love this. And here's the reason why. People get butthurt. They get butthurt a lot. They get embarrassed. They feel like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I think you set it up to say, what's the plan And we do it on the other side. And I just never heard it called restoration, I guess. But I love the fact of saying, all right, what is our new communication going to be? What is our new thing going to be to make sure this doesn't happen? And I know we do that, but again, calling it is now it's mind blowing to me that it's called a restoration. I love that.
It's about youth. I mean, that's the term that we've been using for years. So I can't take credit, but
take full credit.
All right, I will. One of the things that I think about. So let's say you have to discipline a staff member for something, and sure. Like, oh, you've had that conversation. You as a leader, you feel like this sense of relief because the conversation's over. You know that things are going to change, hopefully. And you can go about your day and you're happy-go-lucky. Well, now your employee is like, they're in the worst place because they just got reprimanded.
Right.
They now are like, God, I suck. And, like, how am I going to fix this? So if you even have that conversation in the moment, they then know that you're already moving, like you're already willing to move past this and put it behind you, water under the bridge. So like, you're already repairing that relationship in real time. So they're not walking away feeling quite as terrible, if you will.
You know what it reminds me of? We tell people all the time, like as leaders, like, listen, if you're, especially on team members that report to us, we tell them all the time, we say, hey, listen, just don't come to me with problems. Come to me with problems and solutions. This goes on the other side of it of saying, hey, listen, I'm going to and I think this is a great learning lesson about accountability. And it may be something I adopt of saying, if we're going to expect our subordinates to come to us with problems and give us some solutions that we can decide with, we then need to hold ourselves accountable as leaders to say, if I'm going to fix the problem, I'm going to come with a bunch of solutions as well and not just do a reprimand about it, right? It's not just, boom, fix yourself. Okay, that's cool, but what can I do? Maybe I can't. Maybe it's just holding them to the norms. Maybe it's like, hey, you got out of whack here. You need a little rudder. In the Navy, we would call it rudder steerage. Maybe that's it. Maybe it doesn't require as much. But you need to think that rudder steerage is at least the solution that you're going to bring. You may find when you're holding someone accountable to something and you're reprimanding them about, or you're trying to fix a deficiency, you may find out something, and this has happened, I'm sure it's happened to you, you may find out an inordinate amount of different things that are the real problem, not just the problem of I'm late. It's because, and now it's like, okay, my solutions are, what do we got to do? Let's figure this all out. But I like that. I've never heard it called restoration. I like that part. Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
I like it. So listen, let's recap here. So we talked about kind of the definition, and I think we agreed that accountability, it revolves around that. If we're using, I'm going to use a solar planet. I'm into the space thing right now. It kind of revolves around that sun aspect of like, look, you got something to do, and you're responsible for something to do, and you need to do it. And so you're either going to use your own self-control to make sure that it gets done, or other people are going to do that. And if you don't, they're going to call you on it and try to fix it, right? That's really, it revolves around that, whatever you want to say. We can, again, use dictionaries. You love to make sure that it revolves around clear, concise, check-in, those types of things that you're doing, and that kind of gets into it. But it really is about the responsibility surrounding something that it works off of. I think we both agreed foundations before you have to hold someone accountable, or you're talking even about accountability. You need to make sure that your bases are kind of set and your foundations are set, whether that's in business, HR rules, job descriptions, company norms of what they are and what everybody is going to accept with it. And so you have your black and whites and you have your grays, and you know that you're going to operate in some of those at some times. And then personally, we've talked about our own standards, our ethics, our morals, and what society deems as okay. And that could go in a million different ways for it. You mentioned it was purpose-oriented. So if you're going to hold someone accountable, make sure it's purpose-oriented, which I think is amazing. You then, I know you've been on vacation, but you worked yourself through what you promote and accept what you teach. I thought was very good about those things. And then my mind was blown about restoration, and that's really about like, look, if you're gonna hold someone accountable, make sure you go into it with a plan, prepared with a plan for the executable side on the back end. So it's not just like we ask our subordinates to look at problems and bring us solutions that we can all work through and work out. Then it's the same way on the other side of how do we work this out and how do we get to that point? Would you agree? What I miss?
Because if they have a plan to restore it too, you want to honor that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, because it might be that their plan is, so it's like a business negotiation, right? Like it might be dead on, but also it might be like, okay, I just need you to give me more an hour off, but pay me for it. And you're like, oh, okay, hold on. Right? Or whatever it is, right? Like, yeah, I think there's a compromise on both sides. And I think the goal isn't necessarily what it is that it becomes. It's that the action that you're holding them accountable for, the deficiency that you're holding them accountable for, is rectified. And that rectification isn't just about saying it was black and we changed it to white. It's about, hey, the game has changed at times, right? Like, so if you're like going back to the daycare, the game changed for you. Cool. Let's make a small change on our end, and then it rectifies both, right? Like you're still keeping all the things that you need to do. And oh, by the way, I think the point we also made was everybody now knows it in some capacity of how we bring it out and say, so it doesn't erode the whole culture and team that you've built on.
Right. I think another point about accountability is it doesn't have to be a scary word. And sure. I'm going to go back to when I was a principal. You know, when I first got there, I would roam the halls, and I might have told this story before. I would roam the halls often, like at least once a week. I'd check in classrooms. And at first everyone's like, oh, who are you here to get? Or, oh, who's in trouble now? And I wanted that dialogue to shift to, look, Mrs. Colbert, look what we're working on. And so I was always engaging with the students on like, what are you learning right now? Who wants to show me their work? Or who wants to tell me about, and it became this exciting, positive accountability where the teachers were excited when I would come in because they could show me what they were doing, and the students could, and so as a leader, how are you making sure that when you walk in a space, your employees are excited about that situation because they want to show off the great work that they're doing?
I think we forget as leadership that, so we always used to say maybe like, don't forget where you came from. So when you make leadership role, don't forget where you came from, and don't forget that you were there at one point. I think in the outside world, and I've had this happen a lot with leaders that I've worked with, where they forget that people want to like, and I'm not, this is not a negative thing to say.
No.
We want to please people. Like, and I'm not saying
friendship as leaders, right?
Right. Like I want to like you walking into that classroom wasn't that you were like, I need to get my fill of I'm the badass on, right? Or this is me.
Yeah.
Let me, like, that wasn't it. And when, and your goal was to get to the point where, and the hope was, because like my daughters come home and they're like, that was my vice principal, and now it's the principal. And I'm like, you don't even know him. And like, there's not like you don't ever see him. Like, you ran into one instance last year that was completely not, I mean, it was a kid's mistake that they had, and it wasn't, you weren't, it was a warning about don't, make sure the optics, what it looks like. Right. And so it's just funny. We get that. I hear that more on the leadership side from my end of saying, like, don't forget, you're the check writer. So you can't they're always going to try to make sure that you're doing, that they're doing and they're pleasing you and they're doing the job that you want them. People need that. Like, you need to be told, I'm doing a great job. You're doing awesome. Like, that's not, we can say whatever we want. And I think sometimes as leaders, we get really gruff of saying, well, I'm in leadership. I don't need that anymore. That's BS. That's BS. Like, you need to be told, even in leadership, by whoever, you're doing a great job. And if that's from your employees, like, great. Like, hey, like, if I'm one of your Parks and Recs guys and I'm like, Laura, I love what you're doing. Great job. Like, you don't need that. You're not even soliciting for that. You're just saying, but that's, like, that's your hope, is that you're building something that's like that. And then you as a leader saying, that you better be telling people that they're doing a good job. And
Yeah.
that's the other side of accountability that doesn't, right? So you bringing up a really good point. I don't even know if you meant to do it, but holding accountability for people to doing the right thing and doing the good job all the time. That's an accountability factor as well, I think, which I think is great. Absolutely.
It's the same reason why at night when the kids have to brush their teeth, I say, all right, everybody go brush your teeth. And one goes to do it. I say, nice job, Lily. Thanks for listening the first time. And then the next thing I know, the two boys are racing to the bathroom, right? I'm not yelling at the boys for not doing it. I'm giving Lily.
We don't change when we get older for that. Like, that doesn't change. Not, I mean, you may not admit it, but like, yeah, like we used to have that all the time. Like or you get this where you get the kid who gets in trouble. And then the other one's like, but I didn't do that, though. I was a good girl. And I'm like, read the room. I know you're good. You don't need to pile on your sister's woes right now by telling me how good you are, right? But the same, but like, it's funny. Like, I talk about the circle of life. And, you know, like, you start out on your back. You move to you move to crawling. You start to walk with like on the tables and on the things, and then you finally fully walk, and you're not very good at it. And then when you're ready to go, right? You're ending up saying that I'm using a walker or a cane, like it's like you're on the tables again. You're now, right, like you're in a like it doesn't, like, people are helping you stand up. They're wiping your ass when you're born. They're wiping your ass when you're old, and then you end up on your back. Like, there's so much similarities between the two that in life we don't change. So it's interesting that you say what you said, because it happens in life all the time, and at work, and even like and how much do we hold our kids accountable to the fullest degree? Like, how much to point in time you're like, you're so cute. We're going to break this rule. Mom's not around. We're good. Let's go. Right? Or whatever. Like, but that's me playing in my gray zone of being like, oh my God, you're my son. You're so cute. Let's go and do it. Versus, right? But you can't do it at work where you're like, you're my favorite employee. You get all the special, like, there's a difference where you have to, like, but people inside are thinking the same way that your boys do. Like, oh shit, that, she just brushed her teeth on time. We didn't. Damn it. We gotta, right? Like, it's no different at work and when you're doing anything. So I always use examples of when you're, cradle to the grave, about how nothing really changes when you look at it in life. And it's and accountability is not, it's no different, right? We're trying to teach our children to be accountable for their actions. And as a young person, it's make sure you do this. Here's your star chart to make sure you get all your stars of the week, right? And so my son, and for our daughters, it's hey, you're about to drive a car. There's a big, you need to show me. And they're like, well, everybody else. Well, that's not you. Like, you're going through it a different way. So, but no, that's good. There's good examples for that thing. So, listen, we hope we answered a little bit of stuff about accountability. I think we both agree, Laura and I both agree, that make sure your foundations are in place, because you're not going to have a base to stand on to hold people accountable if you don't have good foundations and good base. I talk about that in my Everyday Leadership workshop and my Everyday Leadership course that I have. And I know Laura talks about it all the time when she speaks. I got to plug your book. Always love your book, Sirens, that's out there. And we always love her to come once a month on here to cathartically get all her information leadership out for the month. So she should be good for another month now. Her cup runneth over.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks for.
It's all good. It's all good. Well, listen, everybody. Have a great month. We got some good stuff next week. Dale and I will be on for the Lions Den. We got a special guest, which we're finalizing now, so I don't want to say anything. And Dale and I are finishing up our book review about what we're going to give for the end of the month. So that's coming online as well. And then I got to promote it enough. And I normally don't do this, but September 15th, it'll be the launch of the Everyday Leadership workshops. So you can sign up to be a member, and sign up for a very nominal fee to be able to kind of be part of it, and then get into the small groups and large groups and one-on-ones and everything else that kind of comes with that. But what Laura and I talked about today it's an everyday leadership thing. It happens every day. You have to be able to do this every day. They're everyday conversations. They're everyday situations that you run into about accountability. And we'd love to have you on today. Laura, thank you so much. I'm glad you had a good birthday, and I'm glad you had a good trip coming back from your trip. And thanks for coming on kind of a not short notice, but just like, oh my God, I got to remember she's back. So it was a good thing. So,
it was on my calendar. I would have.
There you go. I appreciate it. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And as always, have a great week. We'll see you next week. And don't ever forget to flip out. Thanks, guys.